Hey friends, I had to cut my hair for military reasons again. So be it, happens every other year or so. I'm also continuing to make some progress, putting on some muscle mass, which is pretty good. Anyway, the thing I wanted to talk about was an idea that I had that was kind of like a brainwave while I was working on an essay that is not complete, and I don't know if I'm going to finish it. But I do think that what became clear for me in writing that is something that is enduring and useful, and it's going to inform how I do more of my writing moving forward. And I had like a mental image while I was doing it, and I call it like braided loops. So it's like, so you start arbitrarily potentially, right? Like I could be, oh, let's talk about the trees, let's talk about the sky, let's talk about clothes, whatever, any random thing, hair, right? Or I had to do this thing and I was doing this thing one day, anecdote. You start somewhere and you follow that wherever it leads, like you're going on a walk, and then along the way, any interesting thing that catches your attention. And here I'm describing like myself and my process and what works for me. I'm not necessarily telling you what you should do. Right? There's a caveat for everything. So okay, even that. So that was an example of me like digressing. Right? I was digressing from me describing my process to talking about the nature of advice or the nature of perspective. And so that's the first potential braided loop, and that arose organically. So I'm quite lucky. But it would anyway, right? That's the nature of the ADHD mind, or just chaos. And then you kind of trace the path back. So you start with anecdotes. So in this case, it's a very arbitrary. I was working on an essay. That's the starting point, right? And I could tell you more about the essay. The essay was about incompleteness and about it was about incompleteness and how do you resolve loops, right? The mystery in that was why do I not finish things as often as I would like, right? Like, and it's just like general answers, but I wanted to know what I would really say and what I would really feel for the question of why do I have so many things that are like sketches. Now I understand why I have a lot of sketches. Why do I so often start something with the intention of finishing it and then not finishing it, right? Like, why do I often kind of stretch myself too thin? And there I have an anecdote about the way I used to play video games like SimCity when I was a kid. And what I would do is I would make a lot of roads, and I would fill the whole map with roads, which is not how you're supposed to play the game. You're supposed to make just enough roads to have zones, and zones is where like residential zones, commercial zones, and that's where people will build stuff, and then you get taxes from them, and then the tax revenue pays for the road maintenance. If you just build roads and you don't designate any zones, you don't get any taxes, and so the road maintenance costs will bankrupt the city, and then you get fired as mayor. That used to happen to me over and over again. So I would describe that as like a so when you do the thing with the roads and the zones pay taxes and the taxes maintain the roads, that's a winning loop. It's a closed, it's a loop that works. And if you don't have a loop that works, then you dry out, you fail. Same for like in fitness, right? Like you want to work out well enough that you get a pump, you feel fatigue, you fatigue your muscles, you sweat, you have deep breaths, and my baby's gonna cry. And then you have a good feeling, right? And then that good feeling gets you motivated to go again. And that motivation is very important, because if you don't have it, then you get tired and you can't go on. And what else is there to say? So that's the winning loop of completing the SimCity cycle or completing a fitness cycle. And I realized that, I don't do it well enough in my writing. Like, I just sort of start writing and I don't think about where my writing is going necessarily. And so this is one of those like curse of if you're pretty good, you don't really need to get better, because you can coast on what works, right? So you have a janky ass system. It doesn't work very well, and no, it's a janky ass system, but it works well enough, often enough, that you don't think to try and improve it until you're in a situation where the constraints force you to improve it, right? Which is where I feel like I'm at right now, especially with a kid, where I can't really go on like walks of fancy with no plan and no sensitivity. So I'm not planning these things out. I didn't plan this video out, right? And I still have to circle all the way back and then circle all the way forward in the braided loop, which I'm trying to talk about. So let's start over. Let's go all the way back. All the way back, I was talking about an essay that I was writing. Along the way I was writing the essay, I had an interesting digression. Within that interesting digression, I had another interesting digression, and it didn't feel chaotic in a way that was disorienting. Maybe a slightly disorienting, but it was interesting. And like, so it felt like I was digressing in a loop, and then I went into another loop, and then I could loop back out to the first thing. It's sort of like Inception, you know, the dream within a dream within a dream structure. You go into each next dream and then you come back out into each next dream. And that allows you can change the vibe in a dream within a dream or in a story within a story, right? And my friend Richard Bartlett has this amazing tweet that I think is underappreciated, where he talks about how everything that lives is born inside something else. Everything that has aliveness has to be inside something else. And I have all these examples of like sanctum within sanctum structures in temples, and you know, like frame stories in mythology, and just this general sense that you can do more interesting things when you control the frame within the frame, right? So when you're telling a story and then inside that story someone else is telling another story, you become a lot more free. You no longer have to worry so much about how you will be perceived, and because people can't remember that much, and you get to suspend disbelief better in a story within a story, right? So like, you know, some of the interesting things I've seen are like in the video game Grand Theft Auto, for example. There's a TV. So if you're playing GTA, there is a TV in game, and the TV has TV shows, and the TV shows get to be ridiculous because they are not for TV in real life. They are for TV within the game, and that's just so interesting because you get to be over the top in certain ways. And now I'm reminded of the Song 2 by Blur, right? Which they made kind of as a joke. They made it, you know, they thinking that no one would actually take it seriously. They're kind of trying to piss off their record label or something like that. And I don't know if it's piss off, just annoy something. But it ended up being a big hit, and you only get that by like messing around. And when you do stories within stories, frames within frames, braided loops, you don't have to explain things so much because you're in the middle of a digression. It is understood that you cannot contextualize everything properly. Circling back, so I was talking about the essay, and then I was talking about this is not advice, and you know, I do have other videos and stuff about essays, about advice, and I've written about the nature of advice, and if I had wanted to explore that further, I could have, but I guess I didn't. So this wasn't really a perfect example of what I'm trying to do with my braided loops. But yeah, where else would I loop to from this? So I was writing my essays, and it's about incompleteness. And so in that essay particularly, I came around to talking about, like, I think ContraPoint's a video that she's doing, her latest video, Twilight, which I thought was great because she uses Twilight as a vehicle for talking about all these bigger ideas about like power, identity, kink, all that stuff. And how clever that is. I was inspired by that video, by the way she architectured her information and the way she presented. You know, if anybody wants to say shit like, oh, that's not a great description of power or whatever, she's like, well, this is a video about Twilight, you know. So that's the thing about frame stories. You have an intent, and then you have these things within the thing that is not the quote-unquote original intent, and that just frees you up so much. And I think with a lot of my essays or my essay drafts, what I need is to put them inside other things, so that they don't suffer from the kind of overexposure effect. And you know, when I do marketing consulting for my clients, I consult with a lot of like artists and creatives, and people are often hesitant to do marketing in a way that they feel is like doing a TED Talk. That's how I describe it. It's like they don't want to be like, hi, I'm the artist, this is my artist vision and my mission, and this is how I want you to perceive my work. Like it's very clinical, very sterile, and it's the furthest vibe from what they want. And then I point out to them that you don't have to do that. You don't have to do a TED Talk, right? You can do your marketing in a way that's indirect, You can do it in a conversation with another person. You can do it telling a story. You can do it, you know, without even showing your face. You can do it like in voiceover. You can do it all sorts of creative, crazy, silly ways. And I think people sometimes feel self-conscious about doing that right off the bat. But if you put it inside something else, then you can do it because you're experimenting, right? And another last version of this I'm remembering is that when I wrote a novel, which is I have a draft of and I haven't published yet, but when I wrote that novel, it's about the local music scene with a bunch of bands in it. And I still remember several of the bands that I made up for the novel. And I still want to write songs for those bands because there's something about those fictional bands that just feels so pure and feels so exciting. And I feel like I can be more dramatic. And you know, in a sense, dramatic is less realistic, but in reality is unrealistic. So being dramatic in the context of fiction, you can be more truthful in a sense. And that is ultimately what I think I'm trying to do. I'm trying to tell the truth without being all twisted about it. And there's something about the braided loop structure that lets you tell truths without getting, you know, perceived in a way that you don't want to be perceived. Now I'm remembering that there's a Gwern, Gwern, he has a blog post about like anime, and somewhere in that blog post is like a side note about developmental hell, and it's a great side note. And a part of me used to think, well, why is a post like that in a side note instead of a post by itself? But now I'm convinced that it's just an excellent side note, and I would like to build a collection of excellent side notes. And I'll end on that. Done.